This is my Mark 1 Volkswagen Caddy.
In the last episode, we made significant progress on the Mark 1 Caddy build. We fitted the manifolds and downpipe and got the engine loom installed, although we found out it needed extending. Additionally, we managed to fit the fuel pump and filter, repurposing some of the fittings from the Audi TT to make it fit. We also successfully installed the new rear loom and bulb holders. Lastly, we came up with a solution for the oil pressure sensor to avoid the warning light on the dashboard.
And this is the 3.2 litre VR6 engine that we got from the Audi TT. But now it's in, we need to get it running. And hopefully we've done everything right on the engine so it starts up first time. But we'll find out. In the last episode, we went through why the 3.2 litre oil cooler wouldn't fit because the front mount was in the way. And I've had some parts delivered. I've got a new oil cooler and cap, but let's see what the differences between the two are. So we can definitely see that there's a difference between the thickness of both oil coolers. The coolant lines on both of the oil coolers are in different places. And I had to order a shorter retaining bolt to go with the new oil cooler as the old one is too long. So that's enough with the waffling. Let's quickly get the new oil cooler fitted and see if it works.
To install the oil cooler, the front mount must be removed. This involved removing the 19mm bolt at the bottom and the 18mm nut at the top. Once loosened, I carefully wiggled the mount out from below. With the old oil cooler out, I could get the new one fitted. I applied some silicone grease to the seal to prevent it from falling off or getting pinched when it's tightened up. After hand tightening the nut, I reattached the front mount with its two bolts. Once a new oil cooler was securely in place, I used a new tool I recently got to attach to coolant hoses, which proved to be a lifesaver for getting those clips into place. After ensuring everything was properly connected, I torqued down the retaining bolt for the oil cooler. In a previous video, I mentioned that when I replaced the valve cover gasket, I forgot to apply some sealant to prevent oil leaks. It's crucial to address this now before the intake is installed, as access will be limited. After loosening all of the 10mm bolts, I removed the valve cover. To ensure a proper seal, I cleaned the surface and then applied a modest amount of sealant. Remember, in this case, more isn't better. Once the sealant was applied, I reinstalled the valve cover and torqued down the bolts in sequence to guarantee a secure fit.
So that's it now, and hopefully it shouldn't leak any oil. But now it's time to move on to the coolant system. With the radiator, the original Caddy one won't fit as the outlets are normally on the driver's side or kind of in the middle, but we need them on the passenger side as the outlets need to go to the thermostat housing here. With that being said, the only solution that I could come up with is getting a custom radiator made. So the custom radiator that I got made should fit directly underneath the front panel. It comes with two fans, which should hopefully be enough cooling for the 3.2 engine. And it has the locating pins on the bottom, so it should fit in the original holes. So let's quickly get the radiator thrown into the engine bay, and then we can see what we have to do with the hoses. So now the radiator is in, we need to get the coolant hoses routed. I've kept a lot of the original hoses from the Audi TT engine, and there's a big pile over there. I've also bought a couple silicone hoses. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that on the Caddy I removed the bracket for the coolant bottle, which means that we can't run that coolant bottle there or the original one that came on the Caddy. So I bought a remote coolant bottle from S&P, which will bolt to the side of the engine over here, and I've cut down a hose which will go directly into the thermostat housing. So what I'm going to do, just quickly freestyle, cut some hoses and see what I can make fit.
The first hose I attempted to fit was from the Audi TT. It fit okay, but the connector in the middle had an outlet that I didn't need. So I opted for two 90-degree silicone hoses with a connector in the middle instead. For the top hose, I found a perfect fit from Eurowise. Attaching the coolant bottle to the side of the head with two bolts allowed me to attach the bottom hose to the thermostat. If you don't have one of those tools for the coolant clips, I highly recommend getting one, as it's made this job so much easier. Moving on to the next part of the coolant system, the secondary air injection valve system. Since we no longer need this, it can be removed, and a blanking plate with an outlet can be installed in its place.
So we've got the SAI delete installed and the coolant bottle put in place. I'm not really the happiest with the bottom hose over here, but I think it will be alright for now, and it's something that I can change later on. The next thing that we have to do is getting the heater core plumbed up and connected to these two outlets here. In the original Mark 1 engine, it came with this valve. When you'd adjust the heating control inside of the car, it closed the valve, which means it will stop the flow of water. In this case, we can't use that valve as it will completely cut off the flow and won't allow the flow of the water to go around the engine. So what I had to do is buy this valve here. You can still cut off the hot water supply to inside of the car, but it still allows the hot water to flow through the engine.
I first connected the valve onto the two hoses for the heater. Then I attached the hose to the coolant reservoir and finally the hose onto the blanking plate. I'll need to run a cable from the temperature heater control to the valves once I get the dashboard in, so then I can open and close it when I need to. Here's the result. There's still enough slack on the pipes so that if the engine moves they won't pull out, and I think it looks quite neat. The next task on the list is to get all of the wires plugged into their places on the engine. I'm just getting the holder for the injector wires into place so then I can clip them all in. And finally, the last plug to go on is a sensor located at the rear of the engine.
So that's most of the plugs onto the engine now. I did plug some down here as well, which are for the crank sensor and oil, which I didn't show because it's kind of hard to get the camera in this area. And also I didn't put some of the clamps on the hoses over here for the radiator, just in case I need to remove it or move it forward. So the next thing that we're going to do is something that I asked you guys for help in one of the previous episodes, and that is spraying the intake manifold. So let's get it stripped down and then you can see what colour I went for.
The first parts to be removed were the breather pipe, which connects to the valve cover, a couple vacuum hoses, and then 2 bolts on the side of the intake to remove the variable intake flaps. The most time-consuming part of the process was attempting to remove the badge. It was firmly attached with strong double-sided tape and proven to be quite stubborn. I tried various methods, including thin wire and applying some heat, but after some time it finally came off. Once removed, I was left with the residue from the double-sided tape, which required scraping off before the surface could be prepped for spraying. I applied some epoxy primer as a base layer so that the top coat would have a surface to stick to while also filling in any marks. Through the process of spraying, I've learned a great deal. While my results may not always meet the professional standard, I've seen a great improvement with each attempt. It's been a rewarding journey, teaching me patience and persistence. I firmly believe that working on cars is not just about fixing them or making modifications. It's a journey of self-discovery and continuous learning. I encourage everyone to embrace the challenge, roll up your sleeves and dive into the world of automotive DIY. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, they are valuable lessons in disguise. Remember, it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey and the knowledge gained along the way.
So I went with cream. Here's the final result. I know a lot of you guys wanted me to go for a different colour, but I think the cream looks really nice and it will match the engine bay. The spray job isn't the best, but I'm learning as I go along and I'm happy with the final result. So now it's all sprayed and looking fresh, let's get it built back up so I can put it on the engine.
The first thing to do was remove all of the tape, which was quite satisfying. Then on to reinstalling the intake flap system. First the end cap with the 2 screws. Then I could slide in the tube that varies the air. And then the other end cap which controls the valves via vacuum. I replaced the old gasket for the intake manifold as the old one had become slightly brittle and I didn't want any vacuum leaks once the intake was on. It was just a case of pushing it into place and making sure that it was seated properly. When it came time to fit the intake into the car, I realised I needed some reinforcement and called my dad in to help. We attempted to fit it in from various angles, from the top, from the side, but we encountered obstacles at every turn. Eventually, we decided to try again from the top. With patience and careful manoeuvring, we were able to wiggle it into position, taking our time to ensure everything was in just right. After fighting with the intake, we finally got it in. I could then tighten down the 9 bolts that hold the intake onto the engine. Now that the intake is installed and doesn't have to come back off, I can put the dipstick tube in with a new O-ring and bolt it on. I did have to slightly bend it to ensure that it wouldn't foul the radiator. I sprayed the throttle body matte black to match the engine colour and then attached it with the 4 bolts. Finally, I connected the PCV breather pipe from the intake to the valve cover.
And look at it, I'm so happy with how it came out and I'm glad that I chose cream in the end. But getting the intake in was a little bit of a headache. To get the intake in, you kind of have to lift it and then tuck it underneath, but the injectors and the fuel rail were in the way. And then on the front, you can't really move the intake forward because the radiator and the front panel are in the way. But after scratching the intake a little bit, we finally wiggled it into place and it's looking good. If any of you guys are doing the swap, I recommend that you put the intake on first before you put the engine in. Looking at the intake, I feel like there's one thing that's missing and that is the badge. I'm just going to tape it on for now because I don't have any double-sided tape to stick on there. And that fully finishes it off. The matte black on the badge matches the matte black on the engine. On the Audi TT, there are 4 lambda sensors. There are 2 on the downpipe and then 2 after the catalytic converter. But when you get your loom converted to fit into the Mark 1, you only need to keep 2 of them. So these 2 can go in the bin and these 2 are the pair that we're going to use. At the moment, the downpipe is the only part of the exhaust system that's installed. So I can only put 1 of the lambda sensors in. I don't think that will make much of a difference if the car's starting up.
The lambda sensor measures the amount of oxygen in the exhaust gases. This information is crucial for the engine's fuel management system as it helps adjust the air to fuel ratio for optimal combustion, efficiency and emission control. I threaded the lambda sensor onto the downpipe and then snugged it up with a 24mm spanner. The second lambda sensor will be installed on the exhaust once I have one made.
We're so close to trying to start the engine now. In the previous episode, we tackled the engine wiring loom. We still need to connect it all up inside of the car. At the rear of the fuse box, we have 4 main plugs: interior, engine, front lights, and a new loom for the rear lights that we recently installed. Thankfully, I've labelled up all of the wires. This will make the process of plugging them back into the fuse box straightforward.
Once all of the plugs were connected to the back of the fuse box, it was time to attend to the grounding connections. Ensuring a clean metal surface for the screws and terminals is essential to establish a strong connection. To avoid any potential issues, I decided to give the ECU a separate ground. With the grounds properly connected, I then plugged in the 2 connectors for the ECU.
I've been looking at the loom in the engine bay and it seems a little bit too loose and I don't want it to get damaged. So I've come up with an idea of using the brackets that hold the coolant pipes into the Audi TT. What I've done is cut them down and then given them a coat of paint. These are the type of clips that I'll use to hold the loom.
To secure the loom, I attached the brackets that I made onto the shifter cable bracket. This way it remains close to the engine and doesn't move around. Then I repeated the process for the second bracket at the rear. Once the loom was securely in place, the MAF sensor is the next thing to go on. Following that, I connected and secured the radiator hoses with the clips and added a ground wire from the body of the car to the engine. Before starting the engine, I decided to replace the service parts with genuine Audi parts, spark plugs and oil filler. I began with the oil filler, unscrewing the housing, removing the old filler and then replacing it with the new one. Also, I fitted a new seal around the housing before putting it back on. On to installing the 6 spark plugs. It feels a little weird as I've only ever changed spark plugs in a 4-cylinder engine. By installing these fresh spark plugs, it will provide a stronger and more consistent spark and reduce the risk of misfires. This way, I know when we start the engine for the first time, the ignition system is all taken care of. Then I could put all of the coil packs on. With every step, we're getting closer to turning the key. The engine needs fluid to start, so I begin by adding fresh oil. Remember, they say the oil is the lifeblood of the engine. Next, I undo the fill plug for the gearbox and carefully fill it up using a pipe and a funnel until it starts to leak out of the drain plug. The last fluid to go in is the correct coolant for the engine. After that, I installed a fresh battery. And finally, the main thing, some petrol.
So we're finally ready to try and start the Caddy. I haven't plugged in the coil packs yet because I want to turn over the engine and build up some oil pressure as it hasn't been started for a while. So I've got oil, I've got a fresh battery, let's just give it a go. That's a good sign. So that's a good sign, the engine's cranking over. I'm going to do that a couple more times, then we can plug the coil packs in and then go for the first start. So the coil packs are all in, let's give it a go. Nothing. I can't hear the fuel pump going on. I'm just going to have a quick look and see what I can find. So after some time of trying to test some of the wires, I figured out something. I know that the ECU should trigger the fuel pump relay so it clicks on and turns the fuel pump on. But that's not working. So if I turn the ignition on, you can hear the engine relay click on, but there's no fuel pump. So if I take my tester, which is on the negative of the battery, and I touch it on this pin of the relay, you can hear the fuel pump come on. So I'm not too sure what's going on there, so I'll have to dig into that a little bit more. But for now, I'm just going to put a different relay in there so the fuel pump is on constantly. So I've put a different relay into the fuse box, which will run the fuel pump. So let's see if it starts. You can hear the fuel pump. Nothing. Still no luck. Let's get the computer plugged in and see if I can read any error codes. So I've got the laptop all plugged up to the OBD port, but I just keep getting an error saying that there's no response from the controller. So I'm not too sure what's going on, so I'm just going to keep digging until I find something.
In every engine swap, there's bound to be challenges, and this one is no exception. It's the hard bits like these that really test your patience and skills. But you know what they say, no pain, no gain. And in the world of engine swaps, the learning curve can be steep. I tested the powers and the grounds on the ECU. It's a painstaking process as there are loads of things to check on the ECU and the fuse box, but it's all a part of the journey. Every moment spent troubleshooting is a lesson learned. There are many things that could be causing the engine not to start. With my limited knowledge, I'm doing the best I can to test everything. I'm using pin-out diagrams of the ECU and referencing the fuse box diagram. Hitting a roadblock on a build like this can be disheartening, and I'm trying to remind myself that overcoming challenges is all a part of the journey.
From what I know, the ECU needs 4 main things to switch on. 2 of them are power, and 1 of them is switched on by the ignition. The other thing that is needed is a ground wire. And the last thing that is needed so you can check if the ECU is on is the grey wire on the OBD port. I've tested out all of these wires and they seem to be working fine. The grounds, the powers, they seem to be working correctly. I've even had my dad come and double check, but we can't find anything. At this point, I'm just giving up. It's getting dark outside and I've been on this all day. So we're just going to leave it there. If you have any suggestions of what you think it could be, please comment it down below because I need all the help I can get. If you've enjoyed watching, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Hopefully in the next episode, we can actually get the engine running.